Hi, this is Will Stewart from OnlineChessLessons.net, and today I'm going to be covering a game from the 2011 exhibition match in St. Louis, Missouri, between Hikaru Nakamura of the United States and Ruslan Ponomariov of the Ukraine. So go ahead and get started. The match was even up to this point. This is game 6 of their match. Each player had won a game. So Nakamura opening with the Queen's Gambit. He is really capable of playing anything in the opening. And in this match, it seems like both players have tried to stay away from their top-notch preparation. As you know, it's just an exhibition match, not an important tournament. So Bishop e7, kind of a tame move by Ponomariov. But I mean, it's a proven line that Black usually gets something of maybe equality, maybe a slightly worse position. So Bishop f4, just trying to develop the pieces, maybe try to create some threats along the c-file on that c7 pawn. So c6 immediately to avoid any kind of mischief or whatnot with knight b5. So moving forward, queen c2. Somewhat of a strange move, I believe, in game 4. The Nakamura had opened in the same way, and he had played e3 in that game. e3 is a good move, but it also allows bishop f5. So maybe a little bit smoother development by Black. Maybe queen b3 and queen b6 could continue. So going back to the game, Nakamura decided to change it up a little bit and played queen c2. The point of which is pretty obvious. He wants to stop Black from developing that queenside bishop, the wide square bishop, so easily to f5. So in turn, Black played bishop d6. So this is it seems a little bit strange, as it violates one of the basic opening principles that you don't want to move the same piece twice. But the idea is pretty basic, because let's say Black plays knight f6. Well, now if knight f3, bishop d6, White could maybe change it up a little bit and play a move like knight to e5 or bishop e5. So it could change things. So instead, Black just opts for the immediate bishop d6. So okay, this bishop stands pretty well. Maybe he wants to play knight to e7 to get the bishop to f5 then. So it makes sense. So, you know, bishop takes, queen takes d6, and now e3. And so here, Ponomariov played queen g6, and he stated after the game that he didn't think that Hikaru would take the queen and want to trade queens so early, because Nakamura is pretty infamous for his dangerous calculation abilities. So, you know, he's a very tactical player, very sharp player, prefers typically to keep the pieces on the board. But it's important not to let these kind of biases kind of weaken your game, because it can be a serious defect if you're avoiding trades of heavy pieces all the time. So Nakamura just plays the simple queen takes g6. The alternative was not very good, because bishop d3 doesn't work. Obviously queen takes g2 then. So the alternative to not trading queens, queen b3, it's not very convincing, because Black has just activated his queen. He's still threatening g2, and it just doesn't make sense for White to do that. So he goes ahead and plays queen takes g6, and pawn takes. So now White, Black has succeeded in trading a lot of pieces, but he's got kind of a bad bishop on c8, and his pawn structure is slightly more passive than White, as White can play f3 and e4, kind of opening up his game there. So White, instead, he immediately plays b4. It seems kind of like a strange move, but it makes sense. He wants to immediately put pressure on Black on the queen side, as Black as you know, he wants to seize the dark squares on the queen side with moves like b4, maybe get this pawn to a5, and kind of loosen those squares up. So it's a minority attack on Black's queen side. Ponomariov played a6. After the game, Nakamura said he thought a6 was a slight mistake by Black, and Ponomariov thought that it was just a natural move here. And to me, it seems like a natural move, as he's defending against any kind of b5 ideas before that. And but I understand Nakamura thinking it was a mistake, because a very slight mistake, because it does soften up these dark squares on the queen side for Black. So Nakamura continued with f3. Seems like a strange move, but I guess he's going to end up playing it anyway, and maybe it stops the idea of bishop f5 immediately, because he can play the immediate e4. So knight d7, and the middle game here seems suspiciously innocent, and I think Ponomariov thought that here both players had used less than 2 or 3 minutes out of their allotted 90, so time trouble, they're moving very fast. Time trouble is not going to be a problem. So bishop d3, knight e7, and now knight g2. So you can see that white, he's going to tie up these dark squares on the queen side, and he's going to have the e4 advance in the future. And black doesn't really have any consolation except that while he will lack space, his position will, should be very solid. So it should be kind of tough for white to break through. Space alone isn't enough to win games. So now g5 makes sense. He wants to impede f4 and h4. And so king f2, just connecting the rooks and getting ready, patiently getting ready to open the game up. So now g4, I like the move. As black, maybe if white continue with something like rook b1 or rook c1, maybe black could then respond g4 after knight f6. g4 would inhibit white's queenside play. So now g4 by white, so he's seizing a little space. He's also making it impossible for black to trade pieces. So that's important when you are defending a cramped position. You want to trade pieces because it's going to make it easier for you to maneuver. And on the flip side, if you're attacking, you have more space. You don't want to trade because it's going to make your opponent's defensive task easier. So now king d8, and I just feel like Ponomariov didn't really sense the danger in the position. It certainly seems pretty innocent, but all these small pluses by white and these small inaccuracies by black are going to add up pretty quickly. And these dark squares on the queen side are definitely starting to look a little empty. Bishop d7, I didn't like the move. I thought bishop e6 was a little more active to keep that d7 square open for the king or possibly this knight on f6. So bishop d7, I mean it makes sense. The bishop going to e6 is going to be vulnerable to attack maybe in the future if this pawn comes to f5, but white's got a long way to go for that. So now a4, and if a5 here, white's got a variety of choices. I mean, he can just go ahead and play rook over to rook hb1 to take advantage of this open b file, or even the immediate b5 to open matters. Either way, it's going to be advantageous for white to open the position there, as black's rooks aren't connected. And his king would also be slightly exposed on c7. So now knight c8, and Ponomariov is just kind of playing natural moves. He's in a defensive crouch. h3, white's kind of, okay, let's bide time, see what black does. Maybe, think about the idea of playing f4 here. And so now rook e8, which essentially forces king f2. And so now knight d6. So it seems like black has got a very solid position. He's controlling the dark squares very well. But the problem is he's controlling the light squares, b5, c4, and e4, but he's not controlling the dark squares on the queen side. And so that's where white's going to come in. So now rook e7 and rook c1, a very attentive move by Nakamura, because now king c7 just simply isn't possible. And if it were, what black would be doing just fine. If he could reroute this rook and tuck the king in the corner, he'd be doing okay. But rook c1 is a very good move because now h4. And black all of a sudden is going to be losing some material. He can't, due to the threat that white is going to take on d5 and hit that rook up on e7. So h4, and black's simply going to be losing material here. Anything he does, if pawn takes, simply g5, knight here, knight takes, and the pressure on the c file, kind of a subtle move. So rook c1 here is a very nice move because it just makes it kind of traps black's rook in the corner on a8 because he can't get his king out easily. So knight f to e8. So black is just trying to regroup, maybe figure out how can he get this rook in the game on a8. And meanwhile, white is just going to try to open up the position, maybe with e4, e5. He chooses here to open up the h file, which makes sense as black's pieces are totally cluttered up here, and he doesn't have any really good squares for him. So black's pretty much got to take, and rook takes, and now he plays f5. So he's trying to gain some space before he just gets suffocated. Maybe white was thinking on playing g5 and marching the e-pawn up. So black has got to do something. So he plays f5. Type of move you never want to make, because now it's just creating a weakness. Yes, he does succeed in trading a pair of knights, but this pawn on f5 is going to be super weak the rest of the game. And if it drops, white's going to have a pretty easy victory conversion there with the e-pawn marching. So rook to h8, creating a pin. Of note here, obviously the king can't go to c7 still. This rook is just killing it too hard on the c-file. It's going to drop in exchange. So rook to h8, and black is almost imperceptibly, he's tied a knot somehow. So he plays rook b8, trying to get that rook activated by playing b6, even if it's going to lose the a6 pawn. He's got to get that rook out. And so knight to a4. Nice move by Nakamura. He doesn't rush things, trying to get the rook, double the rooks. Knight to a4 is just simple. So now king c7 is, does work, but after knight b6, again that threat on the d5 pawn. And here he played bishop e6. So obviously white was threatening just takes, and to take the pawn on f5. I don't know. I think black is in some dire straits here because white is threatening knight takes d5 here, so black defends that. Now rook f8. And so the problem is black can't play knight d6 because of knight a8. And all of a sudden white's just going to win an exchange and still have all of the pluses that he had before. So knight to a8, removing the defender of the b8 rook. So with that in mind, rook f8 is going to simply win a pawn. So rook, black tries to trade pieces. So now knight d6, and black finally activates that rook, but he's down a pawn, and white's still got a comfortable game. So a little rerouting of the knight, just massaging the pawns on b7 and a6. And here it looks like, well, white's giving up a pawn, but actually he's not. If knight takes, it's going to be extremely easy for white to win the game. Something like this. And all of a sudden white is up 2 pawns. Easily winning. So here, white simply traded. And we're stuck with a good knight against a bad bishop. And white has 2 protected passed pawns. Should be a pretty easy victory. So after c5, in this position, Ponomariov resigned because he really doesn't have any counterplay. White just has too many pawns. After a move like b5, let's say white plays knight to a2, and these pawns aren't going to go anywhere. White's just going to march his king up, no problem. So a very fine game by Nakamura, and it will be interesting to see how the rest of the match plays out. There's still, I believe, 4 rapid games left. So this is Will Stewart from OnlineChessLessons.net, and